everybody, I hope you're having a nice day. I'm here for my final extra video that I've been doing, so this is the fourth one. If you haven't seen the other ones, we'll make sure we put the links to them below, but I've done 4 videos on how to do various different things that you guys have asked me to do over the past few months. And the last one is how to insert a sleeve. I think sleeves are pretty much as hated as zips are. I personally really don't like putting sleeves in, and they are really tricky, especially with some fabrics more than others. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to put a sleeve in, and I'm going to be using our shift dress pattern, which is what I'm wearing. I've made it out of a Georgette, this one, and I'm going to be making it out of a rayon, so this lovely little rayon pink spot, and I'm going to talk you through the steps on how to do that. So first things first, we need to make sure you've stitched your sleeve together. We've also hemmed this one because I thought it was easy just to hem it before, no reason why. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in an ease stitch. Now, just to tell you a little bit about sleeves, sleeves are always, the sleeve head is pretty much 99% of the time bigger than the armhole. And the reason why is you need to have some extra room at the top of your shoulder for movement. If you don't have that, then it would be really uncomfortable and tight. So that's why we have to ease them in. And the term easing means essentially pushing more fabric into less fabric. So more fabric on the sleeve into less fabric on the armhole. And to make it easier to do that, we use ease stitching by prepping it with this. So ease stitching is essentially 2 rows of gather stitching that run from notches. Usually the notches are that mark the back and the front of the sleeve, or sometimes there's other notches that are sort of at a 10 to 2 position, and you run 2 rows of ease stitching there. Now the ease stitching needs to be inside of the seam allowance. So if your seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters, I would do ease stitching at 1.4 and maybe at 1 centimeter seam allowance. And your ease stitching is essentially a really long stitch, like a gather stitch, so putting your machine onto the longest stitch that it can do and making sure you don't reverse at the start or at the end. So I'm going to start off by doing that. There's my ease stitching, and I've done it from my notches on the back all the way to the notch on the front. So just to point out, on a sleeve you have 2 notches next to each other to mark the back of the sleeve, and also 1 at the front to help you line up with the armhole and also to let you know which is the front and back of the sleeve. And normally you will also have a notch at the top at the sleeve head, so right at the top of the sleeve. So what we're going to do now is just pull those ease stitches. So if you just pull 2 threads from the top, and you can then gather up some of the sleeve. Now this can be adjusted when we're pinning it, so just do a little bit. And then I'm going to take the shift dress and I'm going to turn it inside out. So when you put a sleeve in, you want to turn the garment inside out, and you want to keep the sleeve the right way round. And then we're going to insert the sleeve into the garment. So into the armhole like that. And then the first things we're going to do is we're going to mark some important points. So we're going to mark the side seam with the underarm seam of the sleeve. So we're going to line that up. So that's the first thing, line up those seams and put in a pin. And I'm going to pin it from the sleeve side. Okay, and then the next one is lining up the notches. So the 2 notches that mark the back of the sleeve line up with the 2 notches that mark the back of the armhole. Now the extra fullness that you get in a sleeve is not at the bottom third of the sleeve, it's always at the top third. So you should find that the bottom third of an armhole and a sleeve line up perfectly. Line up that other notch. And then finally I'm going to take the notch that marks the sleeve head and line that up with the shoulder seam. This is again normally the case with all sleeves. Sometimes it might be lining up to a yoke or another part, but generally it's lining up to a shoulder seam and popping a pin in there. Okay, I'm now just going to fill in the pins at the bottom third, so I'm just going to put a couple of pins in in between my notch pin and my underarm pin, and then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Oops, it's a very big pin. There we go. Right, now comes the tricky bit, the easing in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I need to adjust my easing, so adjust the stitching that I've pulled by just laying it and feeling across. I think that's about right, so I don't need to gather any more, don't need to pull those ends anymore. So now what I need to do is just distribute that fullness evenly across. So I'm going to try and do that a little bit first by just moving the sleeve around, and then I'm going to start pinning. So pop a pin in there, and then pop another pin in here. I am going to allow most of the extra fullness to go in this section, so that is the top third. And at this point you need to put lots of pins. Use the pin as well to kind of move the gathers along and ease the fabric in evenly. So you can see I'm sort of almost scraping the fabric there. And the idea is that you push more fabric into less fabric, but you don't stitch in any pleats. And there's nothing wrong with doing one round of pinning and then going back and adjusting it. So don't feel like you need to get it all spot on straight away. So here you can see there's a really distinguished little pleat there, so I want to make sure that I get rid of that. So I just use the pin just to move that fullness along to even it out. And I think I'm going to need to move this fullness here back a little, so I'm just going to move it back until I've got rid of that, and it will prevent any little pleats forming. Okay, so that's one side done. Now I'm going to do exactly the same with the other side. Now the other side I think does need to be pulled and gathered a little bit more, so I'm just going to take those two ends and just pull the stitches just to give myself a little bit more gather there. That feels about right. Let's just see as we line it up. Yes, that's better. Okay, so we're now going to do exactly the same on this side. And the reason why we're pinning from the sleeve side is because it's quite hard to prevent yourself from stitching pleats in even after you've pinned if you're sewing from the dress side, so if you're sewing from the armhole side. So when you have something that's fuller and needs easing in or gathering in, you normally would always sew with the gathering or easing side face up so that you can see what you're doing and it will help you ease in as you stitch as well and stop you from sewing any little pleats in. So you may think this is a crazy amount of pins, but it makes it so much easier, so don't be too shy of putting pins in. And you'll find that some fabrics will ease in a lot better than others. I'm using a rayon, which is quite tricky. It's not as tricky though as a cotton, so there's no pin police. No one's going to tell you off for putting too many pins in. Okay, I'm really happy with that. I think that's fine. I feel like I've eased that in well. I'm just checking on the back now, on the sleeve armhole side, sorry, that I haven't caught any armhole in and created any pleats there. I'm happy with that, so I'm now going to stitch it in. Now if this was something that you were sewing for the first time and you weren't sure if the sleeve was going to fit properly and the shoulder seam was maybe going to be in the wrong position, I'd recommend doing a basting stitch for this, so a long stitch length, the machine tack, before you put it in. But if you are confident, you can go straight away and use a regular stitch length. So when you sew a sleeve, you're going to start from the underarm seam always. So you want to get that underneath the machine. The seam allowance for me is 1.5 cm. And now what I've done is I've created a little flat area, so the first little section that I'm going to sew is nice and flat. I'm going to take those first two pins out. just going to take it nice and slowly. So we've got the challenge of sewing a curve as well as easing fabric in, so really don't rush. And take your pins out at the last minute. You want to keep those pins in as long as possible. So guys, I've just finished and having a look, and that is really well eased in. So if you move around, you can see there are points where it is kind of looks like it's gathering, but when you smooth your finger over the seam, there is no pleats or anything in there at all. It's just where the fabric has been manipulated in. So that's perfect easing in. And you can then take out your ease stitching because you don't need that in anymore. So you should just be able to pull that nicely and it should come out. So if we turn it the right way around, you can then see what it looks like from the outside. So the sleeve there is no pleats or anything like that, but there is a fullness to it, so it gives a roundness to the top of the sleeve, and that's what we're aiming for. So what you can't do with a sleeve is to hard press it, because that will ruin it. But what you can do is you can insert a pressing ham into the sleeve, into the shoulder seam, and just steam up to it, and that can give you a crisper finish. So you can go around and do that, or if that sounds too scary, you don't need to press it at all. You could just press the underarm, the third section where it is flat. But yeah, that's how you insert a sleeve. Okay, I hope you found that useful, and I hope you don't beat yourselves up if you can't put a sleeve in perfectly the first time, because they are really challenging, and even after 25 years of sewing, I still sometimes make mistakes and don't put a sleeve in properly and have to unpick a bit and go back, and that's fine. So the main thing is to take your time, and if you need to go back and redo a bit, then you can just do that. Okay, that's it for the end of my how-to videos, guys. I hope you found them all useful. If you want to see any other things, any other tutorials, do let us know in the comments below, because I'm here for you. So whatever you guys want to learn, let me know and I will try my best to give you that. But for now, that's it. I hope you have a nice day and I'll see you next time. Bye.